Howdy, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Oh, I think this is our third administration. We've been doing this show for going on 12 years. Anyway, you know, big theme in 2016 was de-dollarization, de-globalization, and now it's all coming to a head. Stacy.
Right. We're going to talk about de-dollarization. It really started with when our guest, Jim Rickards, who, you know, has many books about currency wars and things like that. And he's also an advisor to the CIA on currency wars. And Obama, under his administration, I think it was in 2009 or 10, he weaponized the dollar openly and aggressively on the world stage, which is SWIFT. He cut Iran off from the SWIFT system. And at that time, Jim Rickards had said to us, well, you know, he agreed with it because he doesn't like Iran and he's a hawk on Iran. But he was like, the problem for us as America is that you could really only use this once, because once you use it a second time or a third time, then people come up with alternatives. So here is our closest ally, of course, is the EU. EU draft sets out plans to limit US dollar reliance. A draft European Commission policy paper highlights the European Union's vulnerability to US sanctions and to financial risks. The paper highlights the EU's vulnerability to US sanctions and to financial risks as the bloc looks to assert its independence both economically and financially. I mean, whether or not they, at this time it has teeth, you know, the fact is over the past few years, we've seen, led by Germany, that it is building up this notion that the EU needs to have their own financial settlement layer beyond U.S. sanctions. It was Germany that led that, and it was because of the Trump bringing back in the sanctions against Iran, even though a lot of German companies already had started relationships with them under Obama's peace plan.
Yeah, exactly. So de-dollarization, de-globalization. So the de-globalization is also a big factor here, because heading into the 21st century, we're heading into that period of de-globalization. That means that all of the globalization that went on with the US dollar as world reserve currency is cracking apart, it's breaking apart. Germany and Europe, you know, they've got energy reliance on countries that the US that has decided is not going to happen, or they're shaky about or nervous about. And so the European Union is like, look, you know, we're not going to freeze to death. You know, we need energy. And so if it means de-dollarization and developing parallel payment schemes and parallel ways to do business around the world outside of the US dollar, you know, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, they have the energy needs there, but they also have, you know, Germany is a really high-tech producer, manufacturer of goods, and China imports a lot from Germany. So if they lose that market, because there are a lot of tensions between China and the U.S., I mean, obviously, maybe that's going to change under Biden, because he has a very close relationship with China, and he helped get them into the WTO. That's just the inevitability. We've been covering that for a while. Now we're going to move to another story about this global fiat system, this global dollar system, this empire of debt, the last days of it, right? So that shows the EU looking for an alternative to the US dollar, shows that even the closest ally and probably the biggest trading bloc in the world, they are looking for an alternative. That's an end to the ability to project power through your dollar, which you could freely print and just like a press of a button. That's easy. But then we're moving to another story about perpetual debt. And unfortunately, this is from George Soros. And I know a lot of like conspiracy theorists will then jump in the comments. But nevertheless, he is a guy who broke the Bank of England, and he has interesting things to say, because he's like at the top of this fiat debt pyramid scheme. The hedge funds, the private equity, the guys who are like the fiat kings that are ruling, you know, that they benefit from governments having perpetual debt. So he's saying the economic crisis is worse now than in 2008. There is only one way out. Let's finance Britain's budget deficit by issuing perpetual bonds and taking advantage of the fact that global interest rates cannot fall any lower. I have long championed perpetual bonds. These are bonds that never have to be repaid. Only the annual interest needs to be paid. To some, this may sound like a radical idea, yet perpetual bonds have been used for centuries. Britain issued perpetual bonds called consols in 1752 and later used war bonds bonds, which also were perpetual, to finance the Napoleonic Wars. The U.S. issued consols in the 1870s. Whether or not those all collapsed to nothing is another thing. But yeah, this perpetual bonds, this utter contempt for the future and future generations that is, more and more evident, this compression of the now, trying to pull so much further into the future. With Argentina, they issued the 100-year bond. This is perpetual bond, so like 500 generations from now, we've already spent all your wealth.
Right. Soros is a good financier, but he's not necessarily a good physicist. And perpetual bonds have the likelihood of success just as you would if you're trying to create a perpetual motion machine, right? It doesn't work. And perpetual bonds don't work because it's just another name for quantitative easing. It's just another name for debt monetization. It's just another name for hyperinflation against real assets like Bitcoin and to some extent gold. So I'm surprised you would go down this path of advocating a failed policy, unless it's kind of like a double fake, right? Because he did break the Bank of England by destroying them and forcing them out of the exchange rate mechanism back in 1993. So he might be setting them up for another huge billion-dollar George Soros scam. I don't know why he's picking on the UK suddenly, but if I were in the UK, I wouldn't go this way. If memory serves, there's an allegory in Australia about magic pudding. It's about a pudding that you can eat it, and it never goes away. And I think the story ends tragically. But anyway, Stacy.
Right. So let's turn back to this with George Soros. And what he's saying is that he does point out QE is essentially this. He says, although it is generally unknown by the general public, the European Central Bank has already introduced perpetual bonds. The ECB has purchased massive quantities of government bonds as part of its quantitative easing program. The experts know that the ECB has no choice but to own this debt in perpetuity. He's saying now the Treasury, the UK people themselves should be on the hook for these perpetual bonds rather than this credit. It's not actual money that these central banks create. They can't create money. They can only create credit. So they create credit, and they've built this giant bubble up. But now we're seeing, like with Biden administration, MMT, universal basic income, all these things are now like trying to turn all those credit facilities that have enlarged this wealth and income gap that they've had perpetual QE. Now they want perpetual money for the people. They want perpetual rent moratoriums. They want permanent mortgage moratoriums. They want to wipe away all the debts of the student debts. So it's basically now become, that's what the democracy is all about, is who can default on their debts and who's not allowed to.
Right. Remember the doomsday machine from Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove was trying to get the War Cabinet to go down the path of accepting the doomsday machine. This is a financial doomsday machine. It guarantees global hyperinflationary collapse of all fiat money against Bitcoin and gold. So on one hand, perhaps he's got Bitcoin derangement syndrome. Soros has finally gone the way of some like a Paul Krugman or a Nouriel Roubini, where his mind is turned to mush, and he's advocating the doomsday machine. Okay, fine. I'll keep my Bitcoin, and I'll see you at $500,000 a Bitcoin, George.
I think it's just, as we've covered, the U.S. dollar turns 50. Since 1971, the whole world, every single country on earth has been on a U.S. dollar standard. That is a debt standard. So we've had 50 years of unmitigated growth of debt. We're at the end game of it, and this is the last bit of plunder. Like, get what you can, try to get whatever you can. And that's like, it's just a natural thing to try to come up with a perpetual bond. You've got to, because we've already extended maturities out for decades. So what comes next? Well, infinity, in perpetuity, eternal life. Like, this is the fountain of youth that we've always been seeking. Humans have always been seeking this fountain of youth. And this is the fountain of youth, is like, okay, your president may be an 80-year-old man. The people who run the economy may be 80-year-old men. But the fountain of youth is to steal from 20-year-olds 100 years down the road. That's you being forever in your youthful age.
El Dorado. I'll give you another literary analogy here. Don Quixote. Remember, that was a great story. Trying to go to war with a windmill. You're trying to go to war with nature, George. You're trying to stop the hyperinflationary fiat money collapse with a thimble against a tsunami. Good luck, George. I'll see you at Bitcoin 500,000. Have a nice day.
Soros is doing it. Biden is doing it. His administration is doing it. The British government is doing it. The European Union is doing it. The Chinese are doing it. Everybody's doing it. They're trying to roll over their debts the fastest at this moment, because if that system's falling apart, whoever gets the most resources, the most assets, the most hard money fastest. This is why you're seeing governments around the world starting to mine Bitcoin. This is what you're starting to see, erasing the debts of people. Like in New York City, we see this. New York City tenants own over $1.1 billion in unpaid rent. That's just on the rent-regulated apartments in New York City. They did a survey, and something like 20% of them have more than 2 months behind on payments. So the federal government under Biden, they're expected to, in this $1.9 trillion plan, the taxpayers are going to pay that $1.1 billion. So they're going to cover the cost of all these unpaid rents. So of course, that some of them, they said, haven't paid in a year. So you're like, well, who's the chump that like 80% of the people continue to pay their rent? Like, who are these chumps that pay their rent and like could have instead started accumulating assets? That's what you have to look at the global economy as. It's like some chumps are paying their rent and paying their interest payments and paying the principal. These other people are the clever ones who are like racking up debts for other people, other taxpayers, future generations to pay. So that seems to be the game. This is the micro quality of it, and then you have a macro situation.
Well, it's not like there's no consequences for all this in New York City, right? Naked man jumps on a subway and throws a guy down on the tracks, then gets his foot caught in the third rail and electrocutes himself right there in the middle of Midtown, middle of the day, right? That's the result of its excessive money printing that's facilitating malinvestment and facilitating theft and narcissism. That's what money printing does. And that's the societal detriment that is being caused. But people don't want to make that equation. They don't think, oh, my city is falling apart, naked people wandering around electrocuting themselves. Let's print more money. I don't get the connection. You will, my friend. Think about it. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to part 2 of our exclusive interview with Gerald Celente of TrendsJournal.com. Gerald, welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Max.
We're going to talk about the Thucydides trap with China, the Great Reset, the new Bretton Woods. So let's talk China. This will be the story of the next decade, we believe. We begin 2021 with China in a similar position to the United States after World War II. Remember, after World War II, America was the only economy standing, and it became the American century. Here, with the coronavirus, it appears that China is the only economy standing. The United States and others are ravaged by this, and it's still deteriorating. Do you like that comparison? And is that an apt comparison? And what does that mean?
No, you nailed it. One of our top trends for 2021. China 2021. The 20th century was the American century. The 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. The business of America's war, the business of China's business. Look, they just passed the defense budget last year, the largest one in America, as the nation's going down. And what is China doing? It's of all the gross domestic products of the major nations in 2020, China's the only one that's going to have a positive. And you made it after World War II. I look at America as England after World War I. And all of a sudden, that pound went away and the dollar took its place. I could see in the years ahead the yuan being the major currency of the world and the dollar becoming the pound, getting pounded down. So China's definitely taking over the world.
Right, that's the, Stacy Herbert likes to talk about it, the Thucydides trap, when one empire is falling away and another one comes into power. It goes back to the Spartans and the Greeks. This is a long-standing phenomenon in politics. Trump slapped tariffs on sanctions on China and its major corporations, especially in the high-tech sector. The U.S. was fine when China was stuck to low value-added manufacturing. But now that it dominates high-tech, artificial intelligence, space travel, we're getting angry. Can the U.S. force China to be a more primitive economy, Gerald?
Absolutely not, as I see it. And when you look at the trade deficit, the Trump trade war didn't do anything. The trade deficit against China continues to build. They keep exporting much more than they're buying. And they're also developing a dual circulation policy, in the sense that what they're doing is they know that exports are going to slow down around the world as the Greatest Depression worsens. So they're building up more of their domestic economy. As other nations, when the COVID war began, started dumping money for the citizens of Slavelandia, the Chinese put more money into building their infrastructure and into small businesses. So going forward with all of this, China is going to replace America. And they're not going to be able to stop it because the politicians of the United States and Europe sold the nation out. You look at China going in before they were into the World Trade Organization, and you were mentioning before some of the protests that used to go on. One was the Battle of Seattle. People forgot that one. The World Trade Organization was meeting in Seattle. Some 50,000 people peacefully took to the streets, but they had those agents provocateurs in perfect dressed in black, tough guys smashing windows and burning a couple of cars. That's where all the focus went on. The reason for the demonstrations was Bill Clinton bringing China into the World Trade Organization. Their GDP was like this for years. They come in 2001, and it shoots straight up. They gave the manufacturers, gave China everything. They were only making junk over there. The European manufacturers, the American manufacturers. Oh, and when you open up here in China, you got to open up a company, but you're only going to own 49% of it. And then they brought all the tech over there. So now China got everything that they want because the manufacturers from heavy industry to high tech sold out their countries so they could get cheap labor to make their stuff, bring it back, mark up the price, and you could get a job in the service sector industry and would get rid of all that dirty manufacturing. That was the Clinton administration. Oh, remember that? What was that next sound you hear? What was that plate? That NAFTA? Oh, yeah. It happened. It's over. Began with NAFTA, ended with China.
If you recall, at the time, Joe Biden, of course, who was in government, was claiming that bringing China into the World Trade Organization would be meaningless, essentially, because there's no way they could ever manufacture anything of value, and that we should, all the noise and all the warnings from all the policymakers and the economics professors who are saying, look, this is going to gut U.S. manufacturing. Biden said, ignore all that. It's meaningless. And now he's sitting in the White House, apparently. So, let me get you a quick take on something, another phrase that I came up with a while ago. Again, I appeal to your wordsmithing. I came up with this phrase, casino gulag, to describe what's happening in America. In other words, we're all locked down and we're forced to gamble online to see if we can make a protein pill to survive another day. And the reason this is relevant is that we've got a company now called DraftKings that is essentially going public. It's gone public. It's online sports betting. So online sports betting in an online casino, which has been illegal for many years, is now legal. So we're going to develop gambleaholics who are trying to bet, online to make $1 to survive another day in the gulag. Casino gulag. What do you think?
You nailed it perfectly. Again, they do this all the time. When I was a young guy, I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate, and they passed Lotto. They used to call it playing the numbers back in the day, and we're breaking up this. These people they're doing the numbers, and they're taking the money from the people that can't afford it. So they used to break the chops of the people who used to play the numbers, but then the government got into it. You got to be in it to win it. I remember I was there when they passed this. It was okay for the government to do the gambling because then we could steal the money from the people, and the poorest people are scratching off that stuff every time. And you nailed it again. Now they're making that legal all over the place so they could get tax revenue. The same reason why these slimy, low-life politicians, hey, don't take a drag on that joint. We're going to lock you up. Hey, remember Biden? 3 strikes, you're out. Yeah, if you get busted too many times with too much cannabis, right? Oh, yeah, but now we're going to make it legal because we can make money on the taxes. What everybody has to get straight in their mind is that these politicians, politics, all they do is suck the life out of you because they've never worked a day in their life. They've been sucking off the public their whole life. All they want to make sure is that they get tax money so they don't have to work, and they get their benefits, they get their pensions, they get their salaries while they close everybody else down.
You mentioned the 70s there. Don't forget OTB, off-track betting, right?
Yep.
This was another let's make gambling legal. And they became the sleaziest storefronts in Manhattan. So they eventually had to close it down as Manhattan went Disney-fied and everything went upscale because of all that asset price and money printing. But now it's all back. The 70s are back, Gerald. That's the good news. And I fully expect the Bee Gees to have a revival. And I just got my leisure suit out of storage, my powder blue leisure suit, and I'm going to be discoing all the way down to the off-track betting and play the lotto. So this is great. Now, you have always said, Gerald, that currency wars lead to trade wars, lead to hot wars. We're at the trade war part of that equation with China. Are we on the verge of a hot war?
Not with China. If there's a war with China, it'll be the end of life on Earth. Look, you know, the reality is the United States hasn't won a war since World War II. I forgot about Grenada, you know, in Panama. And you could see the brilliance of the United States military and their police in what happened in Washington on January 6th. So the how about, what is it called? The Afghan war? What is only going on now for 20 years? No, we get in a war with China. It's over. It's over. But the wars that I see that we have to start worrying about are going to start breaking out in the Middle East as tensions keep rising around where Ethiopia, Uganda, Congo, Libya, Syria, Turkey. Again, when all else fails, they take you to war. Israel, what's going on with Netanyahu, running again and again and again and being brought up on charges that he still can't face, and they're not doing it. So I'm more concerned about that because the United States knows that if there's ever a war with China, it's the end of the world.
So let's dig a little bit into U.S. dollar policy, foreign policy in Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis and the U.S. seem to be loggerheads, and that they're a main supporter of the U.S. dollar. That's part of the agreement, the petrodollar from the early 70s, you know, back to the 70s. Is that the linchpin that if we pull that out, the dollar collapses?
I would say so, yes, absolutely.
All right, let me follow up. Let me just hit you with another question here. The IMF wants a Bretton Woods, and World Economic Forum is calling for a great reset. What's your forecast on what these two separate but related items mean going on? They got two major themes here. How do they connect?
They connect because it's one big club. It's the bankster bandits. And all they're going to do is to create more and more businesses and opportunities so the few can control everything. And again, you see it with the people, how it's okay if you just throw me a couple of bucks. I'm doing fine. I don't have to go to work. So it's all coming, and I can see new currencies coming too. And I think that they know it. They know it. You're already seeing, you heard just Christine Lagarde, the former head of the International Monetary Fund, that's now the head of the European Central Bank, coming out and warning against Bitcoin. And you saw what happened. As soon as she said it, boom, Bitcoin prices, after they rebounded, started going back down again. They know that the people know that this money and what they're doing is a total fraud. They know it's worthless. So I believe they're going to come out. All of a sudden, one day we're waking up. We're doing away with that dirty cash. It's filthy. It's only been around forever, but it's going to get you sick. So we're coming out with digital trash. The dollar's gone. The euro's gone. We're coming up with a universal when you put the Great Reset together. They'll come up with something new that's worthless. and that'll get them out of their so-called debt that they don't have to pay. And they're going to try to destroy gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies. And just one thing, that's not a conspiracy theory. Wasn't it the JP Morgan Chase gang that had to pay $900 million for rigging the precious metals market?
Yeah, and you know how they paid that fine? They rigged more of the precious metals market. Anyway, Gerald, we got to go. Great to talk with you, and have a great 2021. Hopefully we'll chat soon. Have a good day. Thanks for being on Keiser Report.
And thanks for having me, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, the legendary Gerald Celente of TrendsJournal.com. Until next time, bye, y'all.